In my first video, I described what I saw and did in the fall of 1969 when I buzzed 7 Russian warships off the coast of North Korea. I concluded that the Madman Nuclear Alert had deterred Russia from attacking China. You have probably never heard that Russia planned to attack China and have never heard of the Madman Nuclear Alert. That's because both were secret. First, I'll show you that Russia did indeed intend to attack China. Second, I'll describe the Madman Nuclear Alert. And last, I'll tell you how the Madman Nuclear Alert deterred a Russian attack on China. The northeast border of China, beside Russia, had long been in contention, and in March 1969, it boiled over into open conflict. The Russians had troops on a disputed island in the river. During the night, the Chinese moved in, attacked the Russians, and killed a good number of them. The Russians were infuriated. The Chinese had exploded some nuclear weapons, but their total capability was in its infancy. The Russians decided to take out the Chinese before they got really dangerous. The Russians moved 50 divisions onto the border with China and prepared for a nuclear strike. But they needed to know what America's policy would be if Russia used nuclear weapons against China. They thought America would be happy to just stand aside and let the Russians take out the Chinese nuclear capability. America and Russia did not have direct diplomatic relations during the Cold War, so they sent the message indirectly. The U.S. got the message, but did not reply. Now, let's turn our attention to Washington, where President Nixon's mind wasn't on China at all. He was thinking only of Vietnam. He wanted to stop the war, but the North Vietnamese would not even talk about peace and kept attacking South Vietnam. The Korean War had been settled in a truce when President Eisenhower threatened to use nuclear weapons. Now, President Nixon wanted to try the same thing with Vietnam. The Vietnam protesters and the U.S. public in general would not tolerate a major escalation of the Vietnam War. President Richard Nixon's nickname was Tricky Dick because he liked plots and intrigue. He decided to frighten the North Vietnamese to the bargaining table by threatening to use nuclear weapons, but he didn't really intend to use the weapons. He would convince the North Vietnamese and the Russians that he was so angry, so mad about the Vietnam War that he was getting irrational and he was likely to use nuclear weapons at any moment. He would frighten the North Vietnamese to the peace table without actually using nuclear weapons. He would keep it secret so he wouldn't upset the anti-war protesters at home, and he could do it without spending any more money. The plan began to fall apart soon after it was launched in October 1969. The North Vietnamese were mostly unaware that this big Madman Nuclear Alert even happened, and the Russians were thinking about China, not Vietnam. To keep it from the U.S. public, very few commanders were even told that the object of the alert was Vietnam. Commanders were told to fly extra missions and do things that were visible to the Russians but were invisible to the U.S. public, and not to spend any extra money. We flew the extra missions, but instead of flying them near Vietnam to scare the Vietnamese, we flew them over the Arctic and scared the Russians, which was not the intent. This whole Madman Nuclear Alert took place at the same time that the Russians were planning on attacking China. They had asked us if we would stand aside while they attacked China. Obviously, our answer was that we would support China. Then, as they held a council of war with North Korea discussing how to attack China, I came down and buzzed their ships. They would not think that this was the actions of an over-aggressive fighter pilot acting without orders. They would think it was a direct message from the President of the United States. The Madman Nuclear Alert completely failed to stop North Vietnam from attacking South Vietnam, but it may have deterred Russia from attacking China. This incident should be researched further and made into a video for the History Channel. But I'm 80 years old now, and I can't do it. To you, from failing hands, I pass the torch. Take it and run with it. Someone of you out there can make the video. This story may be found on page 50 of my book, The Spirit of Attack.